Okay, Troy Bridgeman, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Adam.
So you are, professionally speaking, a journalist, and as journalists sometimes do, you've decided you're going to go from being the one asking questions to being the one answering questions. So could you talk a bit about your decision making? I know people ask me about running for government all the time, and I politely decline. I politely say I'm not qualified or something, but
Not qualified.
you are going in. You are going all in. You're putting all your chips in the middle of the table. Why is that?
Well, it's kind of funny because before I became a journalist, I had all kinds of people trying to encourage me to get into politics because you know, I talk too much and I'm interested in stuff and I was relatively active politically, like not in any sort of be a part of a group or anything, but I was, very interested in politics, a bit of a political nerd, I guess you could say. And then, uh, but I always thought there's a certain type of person who's a politician. And then I just thought, I love writing and I love actually being able to hold these people to account. So I decided to get into journalism instead. And that was back in the late 80s. And so, uh, And so that's what I ended up doing. And of course, you know yourself, and I've tried to talk you into going to the dark side, as we say. And that is kind of it's frowned on as a journalist because, you're supposed to be holding these people to account, not jumping in with them. And so it was a kind of a difficult decision in some ways, but, I'm not getting any younger. And I really think I can bring a perspective to. I'm not running for mayor or anything. I'm just running for councillor. And people say you should run for mayor. I'm like, oh, please no. I've
Yeah,
seen
no, for sure.
that's a thankless job. And this not to say this is a thankful job, but it's been a weird experience already. Like
How so?
just
How so? How so?
well, I'm getting a lot of people who are, I guess you want to say, they're supportive of me because they think that I might bring some honesty and that sort of thing to the process, but they want me to run in another ward. So,
This is what's interesting to me because War 2 is always a tight race.
mhm,
And until very recently, it was both the incumbents were running. So
yeah,
it's already, it's already kind of an uphill climb. There is a sort of um I guess shortcut for incumbents. And this is
yeah,
for not just Ward 2, but any ward.
yeah,
But you are one of, I think, last count, eight people
yeah.
running in this ward. It is probably, I don't want to say it's the most important ward. All wards are important, but I mean, in terms of like visibility, this is the downtown ward. This is the old part of Guelph.
Hmm.
Um, this is that you probably, if you did have your pick of wards, you probably chose the toughest ward to run in. Is what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
And the reason I picked this ward because I live in this ward.
Right.
So I, like a lot of people say, hey, why don't you run in another ward where it's less competitive and you can be the progressive voice in that, this whole thing about being a progressive. And but I live in this ward. My family lives in this ward, like my daughter and my grandchildren, and so and I do almost everything in this ward. Like
Mhm.
most of my daily life is either working from home, which I've been doing for as a freelancer for over 30 years, and I've lived in this specific ward at this house for 20 years. And so and then there's downtown, which is the center of a lot of, well, as you know, it's the center of a lot of what's happening for journalists in the community because City Hall and the hospitals and the courts and and then a lot of like the entertainment, a lot of stuff is centered here in the city downtown. So and I think I have a good handle on. I'm not going to say I have a good handle on all the issues because unlike you, I don't follow the particulars of City Hall every day. I don't tune into the meetings, and to my and that's a fault of mine.
Mm,
I tell people I've been so turned off of politics for the last since COVID,
mm,
since the pandemic, when everything just sort of went, so partisan and crazy, and that, I didn't like it. And typically I love politics, and I really typically normally like politicians. It's rare that I meet a politician I don't like. And there's been a few exceptions, but most of the time I like them. And these are people who want to serve the community. But the partisan direction everything went has been a real turnoff to me. And so I've kind of zoned it out. And maybe this is another way of sort of force me back into the arena, or whatever you want to
mm.
call it.
Well, I want to attenuate that a bit because when you say partisan, like because just strictly on the way our cities are organized or our municipalities are organized, it's not a party system. So when you
Mm-hmm.
look at City Hall and partisanship there, what does that look like to you?
Well, I just think there is a deliberate partisan culture, and
Mm,
this is a lot of I talk to what you might call the more left-leaning politicians, and I talk to the more right-leaning politicians, which I had the luxury to do, which you have a luxury to do too, because you get to talk to these people as a journalist, and they always say, "Oh, Guelph's too lefty liberal, and we got to get him out of there." And of course, the lefties are saying, "Oh, the right's taking over," and blah 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 blah. And I'm thinking, well, what about us all trying to work together and make this work? And let's not focus on that. And I'm not a politician. This is I guess, and as a journalist, through my whole career, I've had to be deliberately nonpartisan. I've had to
mm,
be consciously not partisan, and that means not just not being nonpartisan, but understanding the philosophies and how these things evolve. It's like I say, I'm a big Beatles fan, for example, and back in the Boomer generation, my generation, if you'd ask someone, "Are you a Beatles fan?" They go, "No, I like the Stones," and I'd be like, "You can't like both of them, like you can only like one or the other," because I like the Stones too, and I see so much of that because it's not even really about policy. Like, why is it a right? Why is it considered a right left thing to want clean water or to care about
yeah.
the homeless or the environment? Why are these left right issues? These should be, especially at the municipal level, because we all live together, and it's good to have clean drinking water, and it's good. No one wants encampments, for example, but there's different views about them. One doesn't want encampments because they want everyone to be treated fairly and
Right.
have an income and can afford. They want affordability. The other one just wants to get them out of here, and they don't want to see them. And I'm not trying to pick a fight with the left or the right here, because I mean it's legitimate not wanting to see them.
Yeah.
That's perfectly legitimate. But and I can tell you, all the homeless people I've talked to, they don't want to live in an encampment either. They're not like, "Oh, this is great." It's not too bad here when it's nice out, but I mean, they get a lot. They don't want to live in a park.
I mean, and it's precarious too. You don't, especially where we are right now, you don't know when somebody's, a city crew with a dump truck's gonna move up and say, okay, like you
Yeah.
have 24 hours to pack up everything and be on your way. But I wonder if that's the real divide we're talking about here. And we were talking about Doug Ford before we started recording, but one of the things that irks me about Doug Ford is, and it has nothing to do with his politics, but it has to do with like growing up pretty much not having to worry about is dad gonna make the rent payment this month? Like, do I
Hmm.
have to worry about evading the landlord because he's coming around with an eviction notice? Do I have to worry about going to school hungry? And because he does, because he didn't grow up that way, and I think because Doug Ford, and this is just me talking, has a startling lack of imagination, can't can't imagine what that looks like.
Hmm.
And this is where our real divide is: the people who can imagine or have experienced real hardship, and the people who can't imagine or haven't experienced real hardship.
Right.
So it's hard to meet there without the common language of that understanding.
Yeah. and this is, I guess, and not to be picking on the right, because I certainly don't want to be doing that, but there's like a permission to not be empathetic, and
Mm-hmm.
because there's, and you see this right in the U.S. too with the whole MAGA movement. It's like you have, even though the most of the MAGA people I've talked to are not wealthy people,
Yeah.
they, but they have permission to, scapegoat these people. And there's a genuine, and like when I talk to and I've done a lot of visiting the encampments. Like I've gone around to, when this, I don't want to sound like a pioneer of covering this sort of thing, but I was going around these encampments when no one knew about them. I was
Right.
just sort of stumbling on them and then going, "What is this?" and going around and talking to these people, and they tell me about different types of people who come and talk to them, and then there's people who come and talk to them because they want to try to help them and try to let them know about services that are available. And then there's people who come there and accuse them of stealing their kid's bike, and
Right.
and wanting to force them out of there, like with the pitchforks and torches, and and I just think, and I've been criticized recently for documenting this, like
Mm.
because but I wasn't documenting it to exploit this, and certainly I'm not making any money doing it. I was documenting it because I was trying to personalize these people. I was trying to remind people these are just humans living here, and
Yeah.
and uh, and I, like I said, I've yet to talk to. Well, I guess that's not entirely truthful. I have talked to some who do this deliberately. They like this lifestyle, but the vast majority, easily 90%, would love to be housed, a place where they can keep their stuff, and they know they're going to have enough money to pay the rent, and but and they're just human beings, and
Yeah.
some of them, were doing well. They had businesses, but and or they were working and they had good jobs, and then something happened. The company moved, or they got laid off, or they got injured, or whatever it is. There's like a plethora of stories. And anyway, did I get off track of your question? Sorry about that.
Well, we're getting a little off track about about running for council, but I
Yeah,
mean
yeah,
it does bring us back around though to I think something I've been seeing in some of the campaign materials, like people's social media posts, is, and this gets into what you were mentioning about not following along with council. And I don't blame I mean, I know I'm a dork, so I go down to every council meeting and sit there for like all 7 hours or whatever the
yeah.
heck.
You're safe, brother.
And I mean, and not all council meetings are like super exciting and super engaging, and like some of it's like really dry.
Really?
And yeah, it's I think people are, nobody's running for council to because they want to really be there when the integrity or the internal audit general manager gets up and like, well, this year I reviewed I kid Robert Jelassic, but
Yeah,
um there is, I think, a feeling to come to my point is, um, and maybe you can lend your insight here. There's a difference between what people want their counselor to do and what their counselor is in fact capable
hmm,
of doing, and I want to measure sort of your appreciation of that.
yeah. I know, and it's funny because there is these sort of expectations and not to keep falling back on the homelessness thing, but you know, we can't eliminate the cause of homelessness here in Guelph.
Mm,
We can only react to it. It's the system we have. We have a market economy, and these people have become, I guess, victims of an economy that's not very forgiving of, and they don't have the support system they need,
right.
and there's a lot of disinformation, so that makes it even harder. Like I'll talk to some of these people who are doing outreach work, and they say there's at least 200 people living in encampments
Yeah.
around town, and then the city hall is averaged at around 70, which is, there's a different numbers there, right there, but that doesn't really matter because we can't end homelessness. What we can do is it's how we react to it, and what resources does the city have, what resources does a councillor have, and what kind of influence a councillor can have to maybe changing attitudes in council or changing, attitudes towards city and how it can be helpful to people. Because there's a lot of cynicism on the part of the homeless people who just they don't think there's a solution. There's not a political solution, so they are just moving deeper into the bush, and they're getting more desperate. And so again, I think there's a misconception, and that makes it easy to blame politicians too, because there's a problem, and we're easy to blame. If I'm saying we're, if people are dumb enough to vote for me, I will be blamed for this stuff. And so I have no illusions about me, sweeping in and saving the day,
Right.
but I think I'll be an objective voice, and that's what this may sound a little, I don't know what you want to call it, but I say I'm not a progressive or a conservative. I'm an objective, and and that is the sense that I'm approaching it like a journalist who would say, like, here are the facts of the story.
Hmm.
This is what the truth of the story is, and I have to be deliberate in my attempt to not have it slanted.
Right.
I have to be objective, and I think everybody could learn from that. I've always said everybody could benefit from taking a journalism course, just because you learn that there's not necessarily that you have to suddenly agree with one side or the other,
Right.
and it's interesting because, people say, oh, you're going to dilute the progressive vote in Ward 2, that because there's so many progressives running in Ward 2. But I think if you're not a progressive, at least in the traditional way I understand that term, and you're running for municipal government, then I don't know what you're doing. That's almost, you have to be progressive because you believe the government has a job to make people's lives better. It has a role to improve people's lives. And so how you can, I'm not saying you can't be conservative or liberal or, whatever, but you should have some level of progressive philosophy because otherwise, what are you doing?
Well,
You know,
philosophy is interesting to me because you're coming at this from like I've been documenting this stuff as a journalist's point of view. Like Morgan has been kind of from an activist point of view. She's like been really active in the
yeah,
community, especially on queer issues. Like Michelle's kind of more technocratic because she's been into the shit, and I can swear because this is a pod, but so she's been in the shit,
mhm,
like in government and stuff, and from a policy perspective. This is one of the things I'm sort of interested in getting at, because I think everyone wants to like put you guys running for council in a box,
yeah,
and when I'm doing my dork thing and sitting at city council, and it's like there's no party line votes because there's no party, but it's also like you think someone is going to vote a certain way. Sometimes they don't. I'm not saying there aren't sort of coalitions that do erupt, and it depends on the
yeah,
issue, depends on what it is, but there are votes that surprise me.
mhm,
And one of the things I want to get out of this campaign, or I want people to get out of this campaign, is like you have to allow some room for surprise. We are not programming candidates to fit pre-programmed
yeah,
position slots on some political spectrum.
yeah. And I guess that's sort of how I want to run my campaign is that I'm not in this camp or that camp. I'm not a politician. And through my life as a journalist and through my life before being a journalist, I mean, I helped campaign for almost every single political party. I had friends they were hardcore conservatives, and their parents were hardcore. They were delegates in Conservative Party, Mulroney's government, and
Mm.
I helped them campaign. I did help with musical production. I helped run a campaign for Walter Tucker, who was a nudist pot smoking libertarian, and my parents were lifelong liberals. Like they were Trudeau mania, the first
First
Trudeau
Trudeau
maniacs,
one, yeah.
and and then I was an NDP supporter for the longest time because I was a member of the CAW, and they supported labor rights, and that was the thing. You all jumped on they supported the NDP, but I'm not a politician in that sense, and so I do understand all these. I understand all of these things, and there was a time when there was progressive conservatives, and that's when the conservatives believed that the government has a role in improving people's lives and trying to make sure everybody's making enough money to be able to afford to live. And they've been moving away from that, not to be, these are natural processes, whatever to say. But that's why I'd say I'm not a politician
Hmm.
because I'm not in any of these camps. I'm not going to vote in that way because Abby Lewis said this, even though I might agree with him. So it's and I don't want people to assume that. That's why you're talking about surprises. Like I don't want people to be surprised because they're going to say, "Oh, Troy looked at the facts and
Hmm.
looked at the what how much money do we have?" No, we can't go and say house all the poor people because we don't have the money to do that. So I won't vote for some if somebody comes in and says, let's spend $500 million and house every poor person in the city, and well, we don't have that money, so we can't do that, and we're not. I don't like. I'm a homeowner, and I can tell you, I did not like the tax increase. Yeah, it was not like wow, maybe, but I've never talked to anybody who says, oh, we don't pay enough taxes. But I don't want to pay more. I don't want to, my taxes have gone up to a point where it's a mortgage payment, and and that's a lot, and
Yeah,
and I don't want to. There's a lot of people who have it a lot worse than me, so I don't want to. I'm not on here to sing the blues about myself, but I totally understand why people are upset about it. I get it,
for sure.
and I've talked to the candidates about it off the record, so I'm not going to say who they were, but and they're not proud of like these are people who were in government in municipal in the last administration or whatever you want to say, and they aren't going around bragging that yeah I voted for that tax increase. That
The tax increase thing is interesting. I mean, and I've pointed this out, and again, this speaks to 10 years of sitting in every council meeting, but it's so easy to agree that there needs to be cuts. It's so hard, though, to agree on what needs to be cut.
exactly.
Because, and I saw this during the last budget season, not exactly half because that's a tie vote, but like half of council's like, well, I don't want to put money in 100 RE, 100% renewable, like
Mm-hmm.
some fund. And then you get some people like, well, I don't want to, do proposal X that will cut this thing. And I guess how do you appreciating council is one vote, everyone at council is one vote. There's nobody
Mm-hmm.
whipping you, as we've said. How do you how do you take part in that sort of reconciliation, and how do you form those alliances and coalitions? It's like, yeah, I don't want to cut this thing because I want it. You want to cut it because you don't want it. How do you compromise? How do you, because I think we're going into a council term where everyone is like, nobody's going to want to increase taxes. And
No.
it's going to be very, very hard unless, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future visit Mark Carney and Doug Ford this Christmas. It's going to be very, very hard not to undertake another increase.
I mean that's something I would have to look at when it was brought to us, and you know that's what I say. I'm going I'm going to make unpopular decisions because I'm going to say, this is the facts of it. These are this is the reality of it. And there's also, it's an interesting because for the longest time, one of my best sources for getting in touch with the homeless people and stuff in the I guess the subculture in the city was Ed Pickersgill.
Mm,
Ed knew everybody and he could connect me with people. And but I was really fascinated with the bench, the way he developed the bench, because he was under criticism from his own brother, Alan, who was a socialist and, well, very, he proclaimed this. So he ran for Communist Party a couple of times, I think, in the city here. But Alan criticized Ed for the bench because the bench was a totally grassroots thing. They had no government funding. they relied entirely on volunteers and funding from individuals. And they said, what you're doing is letting the government off the hook to help the poor. But I remember just thinking, this is actually brilliant because you are feeding these people and helping them in a lot of different ways without the government.
Yeah.
And so City Hall had no control over what they did. Well, they eventually did start to get control, but well, not so much City Hall, but public health went in and said, well, now grandma can't make muffins for you anymore.
Yes.
You gotta get them done in the kitchen and all this stuff. But ultimately, these are other ways of solving problems that are not the government. And that's why I say, yeah, do I consider myself progressive? Well, in the old school word of progressive, if government can help, they should, and if it's feasible and everything else. But there is also other ways to that not everything can be solved that way. But and talking about taxes and the cost of housing in the city, you hear these, well, we just got to drive down the price of homes. Well, I'm a
Hmm.
homeowner. Okay, the
Right.
one thing I own of value, you want to lower the price of it. Like I don't know if I'm going to jump all over that idea. I mean, and at the same time, I care about the cost of housing, and so. But do I want to? Is that the solution to me, or is that where we're going to reduce the cost of your house by 25%?
It's the
Or
great paradox of our time because we taught generations of people, you buy a home, it appreciates in value, and then
Mhm,
it's also your retirement nest egg. And
exactly.
everyone bought into that. And here we are. And now, you know, the price of a house is about the same amount of money you need to retire on,
Mhm,
except you're being asked to buy it in your 20s and 30s, and it's not feasible for people. Um, we've let a lot of light into housing issues, but
yeah.
I always like to ask candidates if there's like any particular issue that they want to run on in this election. Like something like you get to the October 26th, you want to make sure that you talk a lot about issue X, whatever issue X is, and maybe that is homelessness. But I mean,
Hmm.
I turn the floor to you. What is your issue?
And it's kind of a topic that crosses over all these, and it sounds a little sci-fi, and I don't want to act like I know more about it than I do. But I mean, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been editing a podcast with a local professor on AI, and
Friend of the
and
pod, Christopher DiCarlo.
yeah, yeah, Chris, and he's talked to these experts from all over the world, and the podcast was funded by a group in a think tank in Britain called Convergence Analysis, and they are trying to mitigate the impacts of AI. And these are people, they know their shit. Oh, I can say that, right? I can say
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
we're good. Yeah.
anyway, but almost the consensus of everyone that we talk to, there's one of two things going to happen. One, the stock market bubble created almost entirely by AI burst because it doesn't live up to its promise, and we have a collapse of the stock market, or we have a crash of some sort, or it lives up to all its promises and it puts 70% of people out of a job. And I think that both of those are frightening. I
Mm,
think the most likely to happen is scenario number two. I think it is going to be as effective as they're saying, and because that seems to be what these experts think, and that's why they want us to be prepared for it. But we're talking about homelessness right now, and just think now you got 70% of people either lost their job or have had their job significantly changed because of AI, which means they get paid less. And
mm,
I hear people go, well, we got a universal base of income. We'll bring that in. Well, who pays for that?
right.
And how do you convince, quadrillionaires or billionaires anyway, to pay into that fund without, some type of government, pressure, because
Yeah.
they're not going to go willingly do it. They're bringing in this software or this system to save money, and yeah, there's lots of wonderful things that will happen with AI. It's going to, I think, revolutionize medicine and other things. But there's a simple thing, and this is a scenario I'd say: lawyers. You tell people, "I'll get a job as a lawyer." That's a great job. But when you become a lawyer, when you graduate from university, you spend like 2 years articling for a law firm. And that is basically pulling precedent cases or
Yeah.
pulling cases and preparing the head lawyer
Yeah.
to go to court. And so now he's just going to get on his computer and tell the program to find all the cases relevant to this case he's doing. And they're not going to need these students to article. Now, will they help them out of the goodness of their heart because they want to carry on the noble tradition? Maybe, and I hope they do. But there's going to be real temptation to not
Mm.
do that and put more money in their pockets because, lawyers like to make money, as you probably have figured out over your years of working as a journalist. And
Yeah,
so,
noticed.
like, and I don't want to be fear mongering because I am not an expert by any stretch. Like, I edited these podcasts, but most of it went right over my head. Like, I'm like, what language are these guys talking? It's almost inconceivable. But I do grasp some stuff. And that would be my biggest concern. I think we don't realize how dependent we are on on these technologies and how much the tech industry the private companies have over our lives. Like
Yeah.
almost every government system is using a third party or a private company's infrastructure
Yeah.
for their tech services. And right now we're relying on a Zoom, who's probably owned by God, I don't know who owns it. Maybe you know it, but
Some
but you
some jerk.
yeah, some jerk who's got too much money, more, and I see it impacting journalism
Mm.
because if I'm because it's a very competitive market and people are competing with people with their Facebook page who are beating them. They're doing using the same information they can get online, and it's going to be way more tempting to just have a AI watch court or watch counsel and just write a story about what happened, and that's just one example of how this is going to change things. And I don't think we're really prepared for it. I personally think we're very unprepared for it because we're worried about like I was talking to, and I think I could probably talk about Cam because he's leaving. But at one point, Cam was saying, we've got all these beds prepared for the homeless. Like this was a while ago when I was first starting to document this. I was talking to him about it, and he said, "Yeah, we put all this money into all these beds, and I was stepping stone to these other organizations." And he said, and we're really hoping the homeless people take them because our prediction is that there's going to be a lot more people defaulting on their mortgages and it's going to be a dramatic increase. And this was like, 4 or 5 years ago, he was talking to me about this. And so
Yeah.
that problem has got worse. And I know they know it's got worse because they're going to these meetings and they're coming back with trying to figure out how to get ahead of it. And so that would be my, and again, I don't know how we at the municipal level deal with that. But we have to, I think, being aware of it and having things planning for it and not just sort of thinking this is, some Arthur C. Clarke movie that we're watching and it's not really going to happen. And that would be because it impacts so many things. It impacts pretty much everything
Mm.
because we become so tech dependent on everything. Like, again, getting back to homeless people, I very rarely talk to a homeless person who doesn't have a phone.
Yeah.
And they have a phone because they need it to access the services because there's no other way to access them.
Yeah.
And and that's not the government's phone. That's not taxpayers aren't paying for that. They are paying for it indirectly. They're paying for it because they need to be able to pay a phone company to have access to that. So they're getting ODSB
Or they're using
or
data at the
OW.
library or something.
Yeah. Or that's government funded too, municipally
Yeah.
funded. And so yeah, again, that's a very, it sounds like I say, it sounds futuristic and maybe fear mongering. And I don't want to sound like I'm an expert on it, but I have genuine concerns about us not being prepared for it and as much as we can do it at this level. I mean,
Yeah, it's a reminder that, one of the reasons, we're dealing with these big homelessness issues and things is because there hasn't been the response from upper levels of government. I don't know
Mhm.
the numbers off the top of my head, but the municipal governments have spent like several times more in terms of increasing on like homelessness and mental health services than the province and the feds, and
Mhm.
that's their jurisdiction. And so, I mean, it doesn't hurt to be. You're right. What can Guelph City Council do against the potential AI apocalypse? But should be aware of it.
Yeah, well, it's because that's what we're doing with those problems now is we're reacting to them because we can't really end them. We can't go and all get together in council and vote unanimously to end homelessness.
Yeah,
Like because we don't have the resources to do it, and it's part of an economic system. And yeah, I think we're in a position culturally worldwide of lack of imagination. Like we got through feudalism and fascism, and we've for a while there we had this great and these terms have been, all the wording is people don't understand these terms, but a liberal democracy was a good thing. It was considered a good thing at one point, and it still is because we empowered people democratically to make great change in the world. And there was a period there where, like you were talking about, you could get a good job, get a mortgage, pay for your house, pay off your house, get your kids through college, and all those things. And the system was working relatively for everybody. If you had there was an opportunity, like in Guelph, for example, you had factories here in Guelph. You didn't even have to be a high school graduate, and you could
yeah,
make good money at Imperial Tobacco, GE, you name it. There's tons of factories in the city, and but that's changed. That
yeah.
those jobs aren't available anymore,
Or
and
they're
so
available. It's just you have to be like very well educated or very
yeah,
specifically educated to get them.
but they're not available to like say the to that class of people to the larger number of people and
Yeah,
that's because the trade deals became cheaper to go do it somewhere else. Like I
for
worked
sure.
for ABB for a while there, and at one point we were training people to do the job I was doing. I was a coil winder. I was making $30 an hour winding and I'm not like I don't even know how they even took a risk with having me do that. But I got pretty good at it, and they brought in these guys from Mexico, and they said, "Well, you train these guys," and I was a union guy, so technically I would have said, "No, I don't train people," but sure. So we were training them, and there was a bit of a language barrier, but we were starting to figure each other out. And the guy, I said, "Is this going to be a good job for you back in Mexico once you get figured this out and learn this?" He goes, "Oh yeah." I said, "How much you going to make?" He said, you say four? Four. I said, "Oh, $4 an hour?" He said, no, a day. And I must look at him. And I thought, that has to be wrong.
Yeah,
But I was trading him to take my $30 an hour job,
yeah.
and they're going to pay him $4 a day down there. Now I'm sure like those guys are getting more than that now.
One
But
would
that was
hope.
yeah. But that was the nature of it, and that's modern economics. And I can't fault ABB for moving out of that antiquated old building and moving everything down to their new building down in Mexico.
Yeah.
But the world has changed, and I think we've lost our imagination. We're not figuring out how to develop a new system that benefits everybody else and still lets people get wealthy. And I'm not against wealth. Of course, I would love to be there someday. I have my own dreams about being wealthy, uh, but
I have
but
dreams of taking a week off and not just a couple of days off.
well, yeah. Well, we work in journalism, so being a huge, getting rich is not the reason you do it,
I went down to
obviously.
Toronto for the day, and that was a great vacation.
Yeah,
We are running long on time, but
yeah,
Troy,
yeah. Sorry,
if
I
no,
can
no,
ramble.
this great conversation. But if people are interested in continuing conversation or learning more about you and your campaign, where can you direct people to?
Well, you can check out my Facebook page. I'm going to start putting a lot more stuff on there. It's just Troy Bridgeman Ward 2 and then I have my at Troy Bridgeman YouTube page where I've been working on this series on activism. It started as a series looking at activism in Guelph called Bellwether Town, but it's trailed off into other things. It's like it basically looks at the city as a I think a bellwether town is a city that is sort of a leader or reflective of the sort of wider national identity. And
Mm.
so I've been kind of working towards that. What is Guelph and how does it influence and represent the wider world? And of course, I'm going to start putting a lot more politically related pieces on there because I'm running and people are like, oh, you don't have enough stuff up there. You're going to lose for sure. You're like such a terrible politician. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not good at this. I'm not a politician, though. It's going to take some real whipping to get me in shape. But that's where you can find the stuff right now. And
All right. Well, the whipping has begun. Troy
thank,
Bridgman, thank you for your time.
thank you, Adam.